Good evening from Dubai, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues. My name is Gehan Megahed from the Society of Petroleum Engineers Dubai office. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you are all keeping safe and healthy. I will be your host for tonight, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the SPE live session, Reservoir Sampling, Why, When, Where, and How. Sponsored by SPE Foundation, thanks for our sponsors. Today, we will have a conversation on topics to be covered in the upcoming SPE virtual seminar taking place on March 9 and 10, 2021, and we will be providing you more information at the end of this conversation. But you can also find the link in the description of the live stream. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Mohamed Hashem, who is the instructor of this course. Dr. Mohamed is currently the Managing Director of XShell.bv consulting company. He was with Shell for 25 years, and his last position was Regional Technology Manager for Middle East and South Asia and Principal Technical Expert for Formation, Sampling, and Testing. In 2014, he retired from Shell and moved to Dragon Oil, where he served as Reservoir Development Manager. Dr. Muhammad was SPWLA Distinguished Lecturer from 2004 till 2010 and SPE Distinguished Lecturer in 2010 and 2011. He considered the world expert in wireline formation testing. Dr. Muhammad, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Jehan. Thanks to everybody, and I am glad to see over 700 people contributing and not watching the Congress and Senate trials for impeachment of Donald Trump. So it's quite a competition, but I think we're doing pretty good. Thank you. The weather, as you could see, is pretty cold here with snow everywhere. So by definition, we're incubated. So this turns out to be a very, very useful event, regardless of the weather and regardless of the corona conditions. So as you could see, I never enjoyed actually having not to wear the mask while everybody else is also in the same boat. So I really look forward for this session as well as for the class coming up. And I hope that you will get something new that you could pick up from this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Muhammad. We ask all of you to participate and engage in our discussion, and please start sending us your questions in the comments of this broadcast. Dr. Muhammad, let's start with the big question. So why do we sample a reservoir?
Excellent question. Everybody listening and everybody's tuning in is probably in the oil and gas industry. And guess what? Our commodity is actually oil and gas. So if you're going to be selling something, you want to know what is its properties. Is it sweet? Is it sour? Is it high gas? Is it low gas? Is it heavy oil? Does it require pumping out of the ground? Does it flow naturally? How do we handle it? Am I going to get most of it out, or am I going to be leaving a lot behind? All these questions and more, including political, including so many other issues, design of facilities, require that you would get a taste of what you're going to be handling and what you're going to be selling. Not only that, it is a critical economic value, the value of the product that you're selling. So nothing better to drive the point other than telling you a true story that I had experienced in 1999-2000, where we were doing the Deepwater Brazil, and conventional people did exactly the same thing. They drilled the well, they had shows, they logged the well, there was pay, and at that point, a lot of people would stop right there and start the development. This was a most confidential well. We did the pressure testing. It showed the formation to be permeable. So everything right now is thumbs up. We've got a good development and we've got a good discovery. Now, what happened is that this happened to be timed with the Brazilian elections of that time. And it was a fierce competition. And as usual, the incumbent wanted to reinstate or reinforce himself in a position. So he wanted to use that discovery news about how he's letting international companies, and here is how they brought up good to the country, And here is a discovery of 5 billion barrels. And we were still in the process of getting the sample. And this oil turned out to be so heavy that you could actually flip the glass and don't even spill the oil. It was so viscous and so heavy that it wasn't producible. And the president came up and said that it's a discovery. So everybody was kind of in a very critical position. How we're going to spoil the party? Not only that, probably it's going to affect his position in the elections. So this is precisely the point that I'm saying, is that if he had waited for one day and saw that this was like this, perhaps he could have saved the day. Now, it could be the vice versa. It could be that the prospect is so better than expected, and it would be economical, and as a result, it would turn the situation around to be economical. In this case, unfortunately, it was not. And despite all efforts to try to do it, it was such an expensive process. Even testing it was going to cost something like $50 million per test, and that inhibited the testing. So the samples came here and saved all these millions of dollars, obviously saved the development cost that a lot of people would have already spent trying to develop such a field that had the hydrocarbon, had the porosity, had the trap, had the geology, had the pressure and everything, but the fluids were disappointing. And that's the point we're trying to raise here.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Mohammed. So you want to tell me that the sample that you are getting in a bottle from the reservoir is representative to millions of billions of barrels that you will be producing from the reservoir over the years?
This is a typical question of a lot of companies that still believe in actually flowing the well and testing and all that stuff. And a lot of companies do that. They don't develop before they do that. Now, fortunately, when we developed this technology, I was in the Gulf of Mexico. And in the Gulf of Mexico, there is a ban on flaring. So when we got those samples, that later on, those development cost billions of dollars. So we actually had developed over $100 billion worth of projects in the deepwater Gulf of Mexico without one flow test to show that this is right. And obviously, we put the things on production, the platforms or the prospect that was being developed, and the oil that came not once was disappointing compared to the samples that were taken. And this statement has to be conditioned. We were sampling what we were going to be producing. A lot of people go and sample a zone, and then they open up everything, and they commingle the zone, and as a result, they could get surprised. Opening everything, you're opening a Pandora's box. You don't know what you're opening on what. And that's why it has to be discrete. The sample of the zone that you're going to be producing represent the zone that you're producing. And yes, to answer your question, the bottle that came up from that reservoir is a representation, accurate representation of the production that's going to be coming, except the conditions are different. We're getting these samples at reservoir conditions, and later on, these are going to be produced at facilities conditions. So what we need to do is make sure that we simulate it in such a way, if we want to predict what's the production precisely, we need to simulate it in such a way that we would put the separator conditions in there, and it will give us precisely that. So the fluids are characterized just like a human being is characterized by his DNA. The fluids are characterized by something like the DNA, which is in reservoir terms called the equation of state. And this equation of state, it's tuned to perfectly match the properties of these crudes. Once you've got that DNA, once you've got that equation of state, you could then come up with products if you change the facilities pressures, if you change the stages, if you produce with pump, without pump. All these issues, once you've got the accurate signature, are done mathematically and they're accurate. So the short answer to your question is absolutely yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So what if a development had already started without a sample?
We've had that situation. We've had that situation where projects that were dominated by downstream are working on a strict timeline and they just run ahead of the ball. And we had that situation in Sakhalin Island, where the plant was already being designed and it had zero tolerance for H2S. And we didn't quite check for H2S at that time. Had it had any presence of H2S, like 2 ppm or 3 ppm, it would have required over $600 million just to retrofit the facilities and to fix it. That is before it was installed. If the development had already started and you already invested in everything, then you're running into big trouble. You're taking a huge risk. I'll give you an example. Your oil is a lot gassier than what you thought. And as a result, you're producing that oil and the facilities will cap out on the gas and max out, and you're not there at the capacity of the oil. So if you're actually selling the oil and your system cannot handle any more gas than this, you have to choke back the oil until the level that you could handle the gas. So this is not the conditions that the economics of the prospect or the development was built on. It was built on, let's say, 60,000 barrels a day, 100,000 barrels a day, 300,000 barrels a day. And if you find out that there is a restriction along the way, then you're obviously not going to be materializing what you have assumed to be producing. And this is vice versa. It could be the other way around, that your liquid yield is too much and the gas is not the issue. And as a result, your facilities will be undersized. You're going to have to either change your design or limit your production. In all cases, it's a very costly process. It's a very costly process. So I would say that this is a big mistake. For all those who think that I met the scheduled time and I compromised this one, of course, you're not going to be there when the production is not meeting the requirements, and you're going to be the one that everybody's going to be running after. So I would advise, if the prospect had started already, then the consequences may not be what you like. You could be lucky and it's not an issue, but really it would be not, you'd be hurting yourself. So that's why I want to caution people from doing that step. It's again, you're tailor-making a suit without taking the measurements. Does that make sense? And imagine if this measurement for your suit was for your wedding suit. There is no time to fix it. And all that could be really embarrassing. And a lot of the projects today are actually like this. They need to meet a political timeline. They need to meet a production timeline. They're associated with major investments and therefore pay back for the shareholders' value. All those excuses are not good enough to skip this step. So if you did that, good luck.
Thank you. Dr. Mohammed, is it best to take a surface or subsurface sample?
It depends on what you want to use it for. The initial sample that we're talking about that we would be using to define the DNA of your crude, the value, how much you're going to sell it, the design of the facilities, the reservoir parameters of flow rate, viscosity, density, all these things can be obtained with a surface sample, but it is not accurate. Many areas where one could make a mistake. There is no substitute for a single phase sample taken downhole. Surface recombined samples are not correct, underscored 3 times. These surface recombined samples are maybe good for crude assays, for pipeline designs, for things like this, and even then there are going to be things that are going to be incorrect. However, if you want to really know what you have to get a downhole single phase sample that you could actually analyze and get the results. We've done that so many times for the non-believers, where we actually took the samples here and there and showed them how much off they were, not only on the the reservoir parameters, which is granted going to be wrong, but also on the properties. Just to convince everybody, you're taking the gas from one spot and you're taking the oil from another spot, and they're not even at the same conditions, and you're equating them to a GOR that you're producing that is changing as the well is coming up. So it depends on whether you're high or low, and you recombine them, you'll end up with a different fluid. And this is the problem. And when you consider the damages that a bad result could cause, you would think twice about this. So I would recommend strongly for a downhole single phase sample, be it with a formation tester or be it with a flow test, as long as we are not far away from the reservoir when we're sampling, and as long as it is captured as single phase and kept as is.
Thanks, Dr. Mohammed. Now let's have a look at some audience questions. So, are there any methods to decrease viscosity of heavy oil? I mean, any chemical fluids to inject or won't it economic? Thanks.
Yes, of course. The majority of the world are actually producing very heavy oil. Places like California, places like Oman, and many others are producing very heavy oil. And that heavy oil can be made chemically thinner or less viscous to flow using injections. So you could do CO2 flooding, you could do steam flooding to heat it and lower its viscosity as a result. There are things that one could do, but they're very costly. And again, if you are going to be embarking on these things, it is best to design the facilities and the injection plans and everything from day one, rather than to start throwing all the money into a development and then later on realize that in order to get that oil, I need all these things. There is also pump rods and ESPs that produce that, but these things come up with huge requirements. So and requirement of power, requirement of space, requirement of weight, requirement of pressure, and most likely the heavy oil is like me, big, fat. And when you're going through the porous media, you're breaking it down. So what you're doing is you're breaking the granules of the formation, be it sandstone, let's say, down, and you're producing a lot of fines with it. And these fines become your enemy in things like pumps downhole or whatever, because they are produced with the heavy oil in what we call solid enhanced emulsion that creates that kind of high viscosity, and that high viscosity drives high pressure. So all these issues come up from having to deal with that heavy oil and producing it. So it is economical, but imagine you are leaving almost more than 90% of the oil that you found in place in the ground after you produced with all the enhancements. Maybe 85% stay in place and you recover only 10-15%. So I'm not encouraging against it. There are so many countries that have plenty of these resources and they got to do it. But imagine that you did not put the right value of driving that oil out of the ground and started doing your production, only to find out that you're spending a lot more than the price of oil itself. So this is what I'm saying, is that if you know that from the start, you would know whether you want to play that game or you don't want to do it. Maybe it's not the right time. So it is important to know your commodity and assess it before you actually start thinking of chemical cost or enhanced recovery means or steam flooding or any of that to make it economical.
Okay, next question. If you could have a magic wand, what compositional properties would you measure downhole?
We do have the magic ones. We currently could measure very accurately GUR, we could measure accurately API, we could measure accurately density and the viscosity to an nth degree. We could measure the water cut, we could measure composition to an extent, C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, and H2S, and to an extent CO2. That's pretty good for understanding the reservoir properties. So if to answer Courtney's question, what more could one want? I would like a full GC, for example, where one could get the whole entire thing and you could do the equation of state without having produced a barrel to the surface. That's one, for example. I would like to have the ability to do tests on that fluid downhole to see if it's compatible, say, with another producing fluid, or if it's asphaltene stable, or if it is, if I do enhanced oil recovery, would it fail or would it succeed? All that stuff is in the works.
Okay. So next question, would AI help with the simulation in the production process?
Hi, Nuna. Yes, AI could certainly help in the sense where we're using that from a data analytics standpoint, but to the limit of the training data set. And people need to understand when we're using AI that the AI is not really smarter than the people that built it. So it is limited to the data set or the training set that made it, and anything beyond that, it doesn't have that ability. It cannot wander far out. And if people think that our next breakthrough is going to be by AI, I mean, it's the way to go to be more efficient, but it's not the way to go to breakthrough. There is no substitute for human beings. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Mohammed. We have just got enough time for one more question. Who should attend the Art and Philosophy of Reservoir Fluid Sampling training course?
There are must-haves, and there are good-to-haves, and there are people that need to hear this. So, for example, the must-haves are the reservoir engineers, the petrophysical engineers, the geologists, to an extent, the drillers and the production engineers. The production engineers in particular, because I think that they could be in the hotspot next if that tool fails to get the proper samples for one reason or another. Then the only other alternative would be to do a full test, and then they would be on stage. Drillers, from many standpoints, from a standpoint of understanding how the formation is so sensitive to their drilling behavior. If we invade too much, we're going to have to clean for a long time. If we wash out the well, maybe we're limited in what we can and what we cannot do. And this is really the whole point. If we don't get a good well bore stable to do the operation, the alternatives are a lot more expensive. So they have a great deal. Also, from the standpoint of how long it would stay there to get a sample, and they could then build the confidence that it's okay to stand 4-6 hours. You're not going to get stuck. And if you're going to get stuck, you're going to get stuck from the first minute. So it's not an equation of standing on the wall. However, they like to believe that. So bringing them to that kind of reality side could be a good test for them. Now, the economists, so that they could, in a lot of teams in different countries and different companies, they have an economist part of the team who is going to be running the economical evaluation, and he needs to understand the uncertainty on the properties of the crude that would reflect directly into his or her price of the crude. And as a result, he would know the uncertainties or the risk. So that would be a good addition. Now, nice to have would be the facilities guys that would know what do we, what are we tolerant with, and how much are these methods, how much room do they have to design their facilities to accommodate changes here and there. In other words, the tolerances of such techniques. The other people that could be there are management. Now, in that class, one of the things that are one of the deliverables is the value of information. This is where, from my 41 years of experience, and specifically SPE member for 41 years, a lot of teams run against the wall because they can't sell the value of that information to their management. So one of the deliverables of that class will be the value of information of such a technique, so that they could have that model or have that template and use it in their field. And as a result, they could convince their management about, if we don't do that step, how bad it could get and how much it's going to cost us. And therefore, everybody could be easily aligned. It's all a matter of how you sell it to management.
Thanks. I think that brings us to a close. Dr. Muhammad, thank you so much for the discussion today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think we learned how critical and important is a reservoir sample and how it can save a lot of money in the development and the building of facilities. We also learned how reservoir fluids can turn a development prospect economical and feasible, or non-economical and non-valuable. Viable. To hear the full story and details, please sign up to the virtual class on March 9 and 10, 2021. Many thanks to you, the audience, from wherever you are in the world, for joining us today via LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We look forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you again to our sponsor, SPE Foundation, and thank you to our guest, Dr. Mohamed Hashem. Please do keep up to date with the SPE live schedule and follow our social media pages on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter, Facebook. Thanks and goodbye. Wishing you a lovely evening from Dubai or a great day ahead wherever you are in the world. Bye bye.